for your commitment to conflict resolution, you know, this, considering that there are all these other interesting panels at this time. I am Esra Çohadar from Bilkent University in Ankara, Turkey, and also head of research at Ottawa Dialogue at the University of Ottawa. And we're here this afternoon to talk about the role of regional organizations in conflict resolution. We had actually another guest, another speaker, the foreign minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but he had to go back to his country last night, so he's not able to participate in this panel today. But we have two other esteemed speakers with us. We have the President of the Commission of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, Omar Aliyu Toure. And we also have Dr. Talha Köse, President of the National Intelligence Academy in Ankara, Turkey. I would like to first start maybe setting the scene a bit, and then turn to our speakers for questions. We are going through tumultuous times, and it's really important to reconsider and re-examine the role of regional organizations in these changing times and in these chaotic times, especially in terms of how they are responding to recent challenges, recent changes. One of them being particularly, for example, the increased geopolitical competition that pretty much you know, incapacitated the organizations like the United Nations. So given this situation, do you see a different kind of role or an elevated role for regional organizations, for example? We also see an increase in the number of civil wars and interstate wars in the last 5 years, in actually, you know, historic record numbers since 1945, especially in internationalized civil wars, what we call as internationalized civil wars. What do you see as the regional organizations' roles in this regard? This is another development. And we also witnessed regional crises in the recent years in Africa, in the Sahel region especially. President, maybe you would like to comment on that. In Europe, we don't have anyone from the OSCE here, but you know, the Ukraine crisis. In the Middle East, maybe Talha Hocam, you might want to respond to that. So let's start with that. How do you see the role of regional organizations, especially in conflict prevention and peaceful conflict resolution, given this current landscape? President, let's start with you.
This important conversation. As the moderator has indicated, I am Omar Toure. I am the president of the ECOWAS Commission. As you all know, we are a regional economic community of 12 now. Until very recently we were 15, but as you know, legally we are 12. But what I can say is we are 12, but our economic community still contains the 400 million people of West Africa. For many years, ECOWAS has been involved in a number of activities, in a number of operations, and one of those is conflict resolution. From our perspective, or from our end, conflict resolution takes various steps. Let me mention 3 of those, 3 major steps we do, we undertake in resolving conflicts. First, there is the prevention. We engage extensively in conflict prevention. Secondly, there is conflict management. And thirdly, conflict resolution. When it comes to prevention, the very core business of ECOWAS involves conflict prevention because we establish alliances. The fact that we are a regional economic community means we interact very closely. And the more you interact in a gainful manner, the more you prevent conflict. So the core business of ECOWAS is conflict prevention through economic development, through trade, intra-community trade. So conflict prevention for us is the establishment of the alliances. Two, again, in conflict prevention, we have early warning mechanisms. This is important because you have to be able to detect drivers of conflict early enough to be able to intervene. And the third element of conflict prevention is the early intervention, capacity to intervene early. As soon as you detect some early signals of conflict, you must intervene urgently. And in the case of ECOWAS, our intervention takes a number of formats. Let me state just two of those. You have the mediation, early mediation, and you have early declarations, communication. If there is a conflict somewhere, ECOWAS will try to intervene quickly through mediation, or it will make a pronouncement that will indicate the position of the community. Now, in these processes, you have various actors. You have the council of what we call the Council of the Wise. At the level of ECOWAS, we have a Council of the Wise made up of about 30 senior citizens of our community. Each country selects 2 members for the council, and these are normally former heads of state, former vice presidents, former prime ministers, former business personalities who are in a position to help the community to intervene quickly to resolve a dispute or a conflict. Then you have what we call community envoys. Again, these community envoys are made up of former heads of state, former senior officials of government or industry, and their role, again, is to represent the community in situations of conflict. Then you have representatives of the statutory organs. Our statutory organs are normally the council of ministers, you have the authority of heads of state, and these organs intervene in conflict resolution either as a collectivity or through a select group of representatives who will intervene in a number of situations. We also have what we call joint action with partners, United Nations, the African Union, and other regional mechanisms. So this is at the prevention stage. This is what we do there. And if I can go quickly to management of conflict, once a conflict breaks out, our objective becomes to contain it and resolve it. Now, to contain it, what we seek to do there is to ensure that it does not escalate, or it does not spread, or the impact is limited. And here, what we engage in is diplomacy, certainly, to foster bilateral dialogue. That is very important because we don't just go and intervene and impose solutions. We encourage dialogue at bilateral level. Where dialogue fails, we get involved in, we undertake mediation. And it is through that we come to the resolution. And when we come to the resolution, we have two formats. You either have the negotiated settlement, or you have the imposed settlement. This is what we normally get involved in. If you look at all the conflicts that ECOWAS got involved in over the years, they are either settled through negotiation or through imposed settlements. And thirdly and finally, we have what we call post-conflict processes. ECOWAS gets involved in post-conflict processes because it is one thing to settle a conflict, but totally different to ignore post-conflict realities. And that is why post-conflict settlement is very much part of our conflict resolution mechanism. Madam Chair, this is my preliminary comments about the role of regional economic communities in conflict resolution. And just a quick response to your specific question as to the current geopolitical realities and the response from regional economic communities. Well, it depends very much on the situation we are faced with. What we try to do at the regional level is to promote peace, to preach peace. And to preach peace, that would mean you would remain impartial in a number of instances. So impartiality is our default position. But it does not mean we close our eyes to injustice. But we thought as a region, if we are to play a good role in conflict resolution or in global politics, we should be seen to be impartial. That is one thing. And secondly, we are also mindful of the instrumentalization of the region. And we would not allow, we don't allow that to happen. So these are some of the principles on which our activities are based. Justice, impartiality, and the interests of the community, not to allow ourselves to be instrumentalized, but then play a crucial, impartial role in global and regional crises. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President. I will return to you with another question, but let me first direct this first question to Dr. Kösetu, and then we can continue with another question. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at the overall experience of regional organizations in the conflict resolution, we can both say that the glass is half full and glass is half empty. Because if you look at the overall track and visibility in the media, the region is mostly glass is empty, because the activities that play a role in the prevention of the conflicts, mitigation of the conflicts, or background work to reduce the escalation status is not often seen. So, you know, we know that there's a huge effort behind diplomatic effort. Regional organizations are usually the main organizations, or the regional countries are the main countries that engage when there's a conflict. So, but their efforts are often not seen. So whenever those efforts fail or return to the conflict situation, they are more visible. That's why the track record of regional efforts are often negative. So if you look at the recent examples, I mean, like in the Syria, Yemen, Kosovo, Ukraine, the OIC's efforts, Sudan, so the Gaza, you know, in the past, Karabakh, you know, the picture often is very negative. So international community have certain expectations. There are too many regional UN involvement and there's a failure. The one issue that is related to this is that in 1990s, I remember early 2000s, there's a hype in the regional organizations, and there's a trust in multilateralism. So it is often believed that in early 2000s, 1990s, the multilateral frameworks for addressing the conflicts will be the dominant. And those frameworks, United Nations, will play a significant role, and it will give mandate to regional organizations in dealing with more complicated issues. So in tandem with UN regional organizations, they will be high capacity to address many of the conflicts. So, I mean, I remember the literature, I remember all the things that are written about these regional organizations. There was a huge expectations from the regional organizations, but that expectations has declined. Our experience in the last 10 years probably, as I said, Syria, Yemen, Kosovo, Ukraine, Sudan. So the negative and glass half empty side of the regional organization is more visible. However, when they are successful, they are not much visible. I mean, we know that there are really, even the mitigation at the highest stage can be considered as a success, but these are not visible. That's why often the glass empty side is more visible in international scene. So there may be some couple of reasons behind these failures. We can give lots of examples. But I think one reason is that there is an overall decline of trust in multilateralism and multilateral frameworks, and coordination of the actors has been more under scrutiny. So there are more criticism from the non-Western counterparts, rising powers, criticizing multilateralism as a tool of the West. So there is more criticism, and this also diminishes the overall legitimacy of the multilateral efforts, or even decline of the UN and multilateralism also affect the potential for regional organizations as well, because they usually get the legitimacy and mandate in line with the UN, and they find some ways to interact. So there are lots of political backgrounds, political limitations. Oftentimes, the hegemonic competition, regional competition, or regional actors' power competition, lack of enforcement capacity, or lack of operational capacity, or finding resources to enforce and also support these initiatives, limited inclusivity of civil society, those are, or weak legal mandate, those are all things that affect the dysfunctionality of regional organizations, because there is a more criticism towards regional organizations. So, as I said, we can give many examples for the success of the regional organizations. For instance, ECOWAS has very successful in Gambia, ASEAN in Myanmar crisis, GCC in Qatar crisis, or EU's involvement in Western Balkans. These are some successful cases, or AOS in Colombia, Ecuador cases. So we can put all these things and show that these regional organizations are quite effective. But we can also give so many examples, as I give in the beginning, that those regional organizations are weakening. But I think if you look at the recent developments, we can see that unfortunately the failures or glass empty side story is becoming more dominant. And I think this is also very much related to decline of multilateralism. So I'm going to talk about Turkey and some willing countries that are taking the initiative. So because of the lack of trust in multilateralism, there are new potential, new mechanisms are emerging. But I think there is some kind of structural change, especially in the last 10 years, there is a lack of trust. So I think the nature of multilateralism probably needs to be discussed again. And the role of probably UN and related actors can be discussed, and maybe certain norms. One of the reasons, as I said, the regional organizations fail because of the political criticism, hegemonic discussions. So maybe some of the rules, some of the norms can be discussed, restored with, in discussion with the emerging powers, regional powers. The same mechanisms can be more functional, even with the same logic, if this inclusivity in the discussion become much more prevalent. So for the time being, many actors see the multilateralism mechanisms and in connection with the regional organization is the byproduct of Western mindset and Western institutionalization, and that understanding limits their potential. So I think there is some fundamental discussion, not in terms of mechanism, not in terms of processes, but I think the discussion on the basis of the main idea needs to be addressed again. So I think in that case, probably the glass half full or more full may be restored. But currently, the criticism towards these organizations and UN efforts, I think, has some political background as well, which cannot be denied in this context. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Köse. And I would like to pick from where you left and focus a little bit more on the glass half full side of the picture. And maybe, so this is a question to you. Can we say that actually the effectiveness of regional organizations also vary from region to region, perhaps? Because looking at some of the like key role that regional organizations played in some African conflicts, ECOWAS has been quite influential and effective in the mediation and the settlement of the Liberia peace process, Liberian conflict, for example. And Liberia is one of these successful cases right now. It is, successfully implemented a peace agreement, successfully, completed the post-conflict peace-building process. There has been peace in the country for almost 20 years now. And so that's a success case. Looking at IGAD again and their role in South Sudan, for example, or in Somalia can be seen as another success case. You mentioned ASEAN. It's yet to be seen, right? Because ASEAN has sort of taken over and a lot of these initiatives in Myanmar right now. We don't know the outcome of that yet. But looking at Africa specifically, can we say that we see more successful examples of regional organizations in their mediation, peacekeeping, peace-building role? And oftentimes we see these successes in Africa with regional organizations closely collaborating with the UN. So again, Liberia, Sierra Leone, these are examples where regional organizations closely collaborated with the UN. We can also pretty much say the same thing for East Africa, some of the conflicts there. What do you think about this? Maybe looking at the Liberia example or Sierra Leone example, what are some of the lessons learned from these past processes where regional organizations like ECOWAS was very effective in resolving conflicts, and maybe other cases too that you might want to add? But what are some of the lessons learned from these processes, President? What would you say?
You're very much right in pinpointing our success in Liberia, and I'll add Sierra Leone, as you have done. And beyond Sierra Leone, certainly the dispute in the Gambia, and also a bit of that in Guinea-Bissau and in Cote d'Ivoire. ECOWAS's successes in these conflict zones must be recognized. Now, the lessons we have learned in those is that there was not a fragmented approach. The approaches were not fragmented. That's one thing. We all rallied, the whole world rallied behind ECOWAS and supported ECOWAS's leadership. So In essence, in those conflict areas, what has been successfully addressed is the spoiler phenomena. The spoiler phenomena can be from outside actors or from internal actors. So ECOWAS was able to address the spoiler phenomenon by ensuring that outside actors rallied behind ECOWAS and by letting internal spoilers understand the consequences of their recalcitrance. If you look at Liberia alone, ECOWAS's intervention or the mediation efforts, there were about 15 agreements, all in all, 15 agreements for a long period of time, because various agreements collapsed because of the spoiler phenomenon. So the moment ECOWAS was able to address the spoiler phenomenon, then we were able to get a settlement. That is one thing. And the same thing with Sierra Leone. Now, if we just juxtapose that with our current situation, what we will see is, as I've said, the fragmentation of approaches. A recent work done by a panel put together by the UN, African Union, and ECOWAS, and led by President Youssoufou, the former president of Niger, indicated that in West Africa and in the Sahel, you have nothing less than 20 initiatives since the conflict or the insecurity emerged in those areas. 20 initiatives, different participants. And what we at ECOWAS have realized is that, yes, these are important initiatives, but their potential is not fully there because A, they are fragmented, B, they lack coordination, 3, they lack ownership. You see, these are things we underrate, but they're extremely important. Ownership is assured by letting the countries or the region themselves take the leadership, and you support that process. Because if you impose your programs, what happens is like imposing projects on countries. The moment you give your back, they collapse. So there is no ownership. There is no coordination. So what we are saying to be able to benefit from our past experiences is that let us see how we can integrate all these different approaches, different mechanisms with the regional peace plans, regional counterterrorism plans, for example, to ensure that they are coordinated from the regional organizations. In the case of West Africa, we're saying let them be coordinated by ECOWAS. It does not mean each and every initiative should cover all the countries, but it should be coordinated so that this ownership problem that we are talking about is addressed. Take, for example, the fight against terrorism. It is not imaginable to fight terrorism in West Africa without Nigeria. It's not possible. So how do you ensure Nigeria's participation? By ensuring that coordination is done from ECOWAS, in which Nigeria is part. So doesn't necessarily need to include Nigeria as a beneficiary of that, but then ECOWAS's participation in it will ensure Nigeria's participation and Nigeria's collaboration. So this is what we are talking about. We need to promote ownership, we need to enhance coordination, and we should avoid fragmentation, which in a way is a competition with different objectives. I think this is, in addition to the issue of spoiler phenomena, these are what we need to address to be able to take care of crisis that we are facing at the moment. The last, but the most one important thing is financing. Funding is critical. Studies have indicated that Africa is very good at deploying peace support missions, but it does not have the capacity to maintain them. This is what happened in Burundi. When the African Union deployed, they couldn't maintain, and it had to be transitioned to the United Nations. The same thing with AMIS in Sudan. AU was able to deploy quickly, but because AU could not sustain the financing, it had to be transitioned to UNAMIS. The same thing in Mali. Before the recent UN force that left, it was an African force that went into Mali. But because of funding problems, it had to transition to a UN force. So funding is critical. Our approach in ECOWAS and what our leaders have directed us to do is to reactivate our plan of action, provide sufficient manpower behind it, and seek own resources. And as we speak, our finance ministers are supposed to meet to determine how resources will be raised internally to support our peace support operations in the region. But what is important for us is Resolution 2719 of the United Nations. This is a new resolution that has just been adopted. And for the first time, UN offers to finance regional peace support operations from the assessed contribution. This is a game changer in many ways. A, it will bring in predictability. It will also enhance sustainability. So this is why wherever we go, we use the opportunity to express our appreciation to Security Council members and to all partners for supporting this initiative. Having the resolution is one thing, the implementation is a different thing. And again, we would like to appeal to all partners to help us ensure the implementation of this resolution 2719 is not bogged down through some political games or political interest promotion. So it is important with 2719 and our own resolve to raise our own resources. I think our capacity to address regional conflicts will be highly enhanced. Thank you.
And I think this is a really important point you're raising, especially considering the recent crisis with the UN peacekeeping. The UN peacekeeping withdrawal from the Mali, for example. And I think it's a really important development to watch that in that sense.
It is. And we must all work together to ensure the implementation is important. It is a bit risky. We are in a difficult crisis. I mean, we don't know how UN, what will happen in the next 6 months or 1 year in the UN. But we believe we all have interest in peace. And this is what we must understand, all of us. We all have interest in peace. At some point, we in West Africa, we were saved from all these terrorist crises, but now the epicenter of terrorism has moved to our part of the world.
Sahel,
So we all have interest in this.
Thank you. Dr. Köse, would you like to respond to the question earlier in this regard, or at least some of the issues that the President raised in terms of spoiler management or some of the local ownership, the importance of local ownership? You mentioned financing challenges.
Yeah, I think the challenges have been increasing recently. You know, the international institutions, international trade, international norms used to be like the brakes within the system. So I think within the current context in the last couple of years, there is even the faster decline of all these resources that will really limit, you know, escalation of conflicts, as well as limit resources that would be allocated to peacekeeping, peacemaking, and even peace building. I mean, as you know, if we go to the 1990s, the overall objective of United Nations and overall peace initiatives have been portrayed in such a comprehensive way, you know, including the civil society building, to economy building, building institutions, to all aspects have been included into a broader, you know, effort to build positive peace. And currently, I think we have been declining into much more limited. So even reaching a negative peace right now can be considered as a very significant success. So this is, yes, I mean, resources are declining. So now, not all the, you know, there is still support in the international institutions, regional institutions, but there's a declining support. The norms that are foundations of institutions have been more under scrutiny and unfortunately under criticisms. So enforcement capacity have been declining. Even so, it is very difficult to reach an agreement among different actors. Even if an agreement reached after long political discussions, then having an enforcement capacity needed, and there are the number of actors that are willing for that capacity enforcement have been in decline, and those who are willing may have alternative visions or their own interests, which may be criticized by the other actors. So there is, you know, the gradual decline of, you know, narrowing, you know, mandate of the peace initiatives, and even under this narrow mandate, the overall structural institutional capacity is also in decline. So who will suffer more from this? So for the time being, the countries who are affected from conflicts, so the countries in Middle East, in Africa, but this will not stay there. So the thing is that all these conflicts, they will start, you know, they will have the spillover effects to neighboring countries. Then, you know, as you see throughout irregular migration, economic issues, problems, and, you know, the spread of violent groups and mafiatic groups can come to the mainstream actors as well. So I think for the time being, the declining support, declining institutional capacity and legitimacy affects more vulnerable countries. But eventually, unfortunately, we will see that the mainstream, the Western countries, or even the stronger countries will also face this impact. So I think we have to watch these trends very closely. So I know that there are certain actors who are very much aware of this transformation, but at the political level, so right now, the emerging political actors in even the Western countries have declined the commitments to these liberal institutions, some of these institutions, as well as, you know, resources that are allocated, and their definition of security is very much at the hard military security level. However, declining or reducing the support to these institutions will eventually create some security problems that can hardly be handled without cooperation of the actors, as well as with the involvement of regional international institutions. So again, I think we are experiencing a process. Maybe if we go back to 5 years, 10 years later, how did we come to this position? Why all these conflicts in Africa, in, you know, the Middle East or other parts of the world affecting us? Why do we have for migration? Why do we have these militant groups inside our countries? We will come back to this point, and probably, so it is, I think, the early time to recognize, maybe highlight, emphasize those kind of, I think, risks for the moment.
We will need more peace builders, we will need more mediators and more peace operations. Let me just ask the last question, and then we will turn to our audience. I would like to specifically ask you a question on mediation. We talked in general about different aspects of conflict resolution, prevention, early warning, you mentioned, management, resolution, but and I understand, in a sense, for peace operations, regional organizations to support these peace operations, huge budgets are required. But mediation does not require huge budgets like peace operations, really. And in the last couple of decades, we see a lot of efforts to build the mediation capacity of regional organizations. African Union did a lot to build their own mediation capacity. Other regional organizations did the same. ECOWAS actually worked on that. What do you see as, what do you think you have accomplished, and what do you think that there is still more to be done in this area to sort of bolster the mediation capacity of ECOWAS and regional organizations in general?
As you have said, a lot of efforts have been put in mediation over the years. And we should normally have sufficient resources for mediation. But unfortunately, it is not the case. Mediation requires actors who have access to the various stakeholders, or who have the acceptability of the various stakeholders. In our case in West Africa, we deploy former heads of state, former prime ministers, former vice presidents, and unfortunately there are not too many that we have. It is either for some political reasons they are limited, or for some other reasons. So mediators need to be impartial. It is their impartiality which sometimes becomes an issue. The second thing is the competition among the various stakeholders, which makes the role of a mediator extremely difficult. To get a mediator that is acceptable by all stakeholders, and when I say stakeholders, including spoilers from outside, because they would want to promote their own interests as a result, the party they support will be inclined to listen to them. But on the whole, I think we need to put more emphasis on the process of mediation and to ensure it is impartial, and to work for the acceptability of the mediation process rather than the individual behind the mediation. So in the case of ECOWAS, the fact that we have ECOWAS behind the mediation processes helps us a lot, because that acceptability allows us to have flexibility, because in some instances, I can give concrete examples without naming, there are instances where a team identified by ECOWAS was rejected by one or two of the parties, but not the ECOWAS mediation process, which is rejected. So we were able to remain flexible and change stakeholders, because they go with the mandate of ECOWAS. So it is not so much the individual stakeholders. So the impartiality of the mediation process is important. It can also be expensive, because they can be protracted. And resources for that are extremely important, and I think this is where partners' role come in. And the duality of processes, multiple processes, also affect mediation. You have one mediation at the regional level, then the next minute you have other stakeholders, inviting the delegation somewhere for all these things. All this affects mediation. So I think what we need to do is to agree on the leadership of regional institutions and support those institutions. And as partners, we can always agree on how to really undertake the mediation. But it remains important that we speak with one voice as partners. The moment you have divergence of views, then it makes mediation extremely difficult. And this is, again, this brings me back to the spoiler phenomenon. Because spoilers always look at their individual interests, be they outsiders or insiders. And this is where the international community should work together to address the spoiler phenomenon.
Okay, thank you. They're, in fact, not very different from the challenges of mediation in general, right? The spoiler management, managing parallel tracks in mediation, these are some of the very well-established research factors that we know, diminish the effectiveness of mediation. And I guess we can say that the same challenges also exist for regional organizations. And for the final remarks, Dr. Köse, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to mediation, I think this, the challenges you mentioned are significant, especially, but there should be some kind of incentives. I think I would like to also talk about Turkey's experience, and recently Turkey have been involved in mediation efforts between Somalia and Ethiopia, in Sudan, and a couple of other contexts. And there are certain, contexts where the help of Turkey is, reached. I mean, I think playing a significant role as a mediator, sometimes facilitator, or sometimes even the dialogue partner to address. I mean, how did we come to this thing? So yes, I mean, we have been seeing, criticisms or, put some credibility on the multilateralism. But as, Turkey for the last several years have been portraying moral stance, willingness of the political leaders in Turkey to engage, especially the countries that we have some cultural, religious, or historical ties. And the other thing is that the trust at the level of leadership, and to a certain extent, emergence of the capacity in that field. And I think that the trust is also another issue. I mean, many of the countries that are coming to Turkey, where sometimes Turkish authorities also reach, but the level of trust in the involvement is very important. But at the same time, if you go back to the spoiler issue, we also see that in almost all these conflicts, we also have the spoilers. And depending on who defines the spoilers are different. I mean, I think in both Sudan, in both Yemen, in both, Ethiopia, there are different spoilers. So I think there is no one single definition of spoiler. Again, it comes to the political discussion, political debate. So what we see is that there is also lack of political consensus. So under these conditions, lack of political consensus and lack of neutral institutional framework, can we still work with the mediation? So there are certain efforts. I mean, so for the time being, many of the cases where Turkey involves, there is almost no lack of, there is a lack of political consensus. Some parties support, some parties decline, some parties are in favor, some others. But I think political will to take initiatives, and to a certain extent, moral commitment and declaration of that moral commitment in different formats generates some trust. But I think we have to, so under these conditions where we don't have this, we have the spoiler issue, we have lack of resources, we have to generate some alternative mechanisms. So imperfect, so how can we do mediation how can we do peace under imperfect conditions. I think Turkey takes important initiatives under these imperfect conditions, and the political will and the leadership plays a role. But again, without convincing the other stakeholders, whatever you do, it can hardly stay successful. So yes, involving in the case is important, but at the other hand, you have to also engage with the other stakeholders who are not in favor to keep what has been achieved. So that's the difficult part. So I think the mediation and other diplomacy gets a little bit more complicated. The political side is more, getting more dominant. Competition side become more dominant. But still, I think it necessitates some will to maintain, efforts under these imperfect conditions. So I think in the future, the number of stakeholders, the number of actors that are willing to take these initiatives will increasing. So for the time being, still there is expectations from multilateral organizations and other organizations, but I think there will be more stakeholders. For instance, Qatar is also playing that kind of role. Sometimes Saudi Arabia's role, around in our regions, but I think there will be more stakeholders in the coming years.
Thank you. And you also raised another important question. The country state mediators are emerging as important mediators, mediation actors, and how do they work with regional organizations and other multilateral organizations is another important question, I guess, in this sense. Okay, at this point, let's turn to the audience for questions and comments. Yes, Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists. It was very informative. Just picking up from the question that you left off, state actors in mediation and how do they work with regional and international organizations. In the case of Turkey, of course, we've been very active in that field. In 2010, we started the Mediation for Peace initiative at the UN, and that's been really a remarkable success story. And we've moved on from there at the OSCE together with Finland and Switzerland. We co-chair the Friends of Group, and also at the Organization of Islamic Countries, together with Gambia and Saudi Arabia, we co-chair the Group of Friends. But of course, the UN has its own problems. Security Council is finding it very difficult to make decisions on crucial issues, for example, like Sudan, although the DRC case, I think, was slightly more encouraging. At the OSCE, I think we're seeing complete paralysis because of the position of some member states. And at the OIC, I think we have problems because, ultimately the founding moment for the OIC was Palestine, and the focus is still Palestine. But at the same time, 60 to 65% of all conflicts are in the OIC geography, so there could be a lot to do there. Turkey is running a lot of programs in terms of raising awareness, capacity building in cooperation with AU and IGAD, maybe in the future with ECOWAS, also training programs for OIC. So capacity building is crucial, and we're there to support that, raising awareness and also organizing conferences. We have the Istanbul Mediation Conference, we have the OIC Mediation Conferences, another one coming up. I think the Antalya Diplomacy Forum is also an excellent venue for a dialogue with a view to conflict prevention as well. So we're doing all that work, but I have two questions. One question would be, how do we create more momentum for these regional organizations, especially OSCE and OIC? Is there a way to get those organizations to be more active in some of the conflicts that they see within their own constituencies? And the second question is a little bit more specific, and maybe it's not the easiest of questions, but from a principled approach, ECOWAS has suspended 3 member states. We have a similarity, for example, with Sudan and AU and IGAD. But at the same time, for there to be conflict management and regional peace, you need to engage with those countries. In some cases, you see them moving in other directions. So, how do you square the circle? How do you sort of move forward with that difficult question? Thank you.
Let's take a few more questions, and then maybe we can turn. Anyone else? No? Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Is it working? Hello?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I think so.
My name is Anina Hegemann. I'm the Deputy Head of Mission at the Danish Embassy in Ankara. So following up on the excellent remarks and questions by the ambassador, we do see sort of a shift in terms of the actors involved in mediation. You've already alluded to the UN's reshaped role, but also perhaps the, in some ways, dwindling influence of regional organizations and more use of ad hoc coalitions of the willing, but also countries like Turkey stepping up, playing a different role. So how can we synergize those movements? And how can we sort of save the parts of multilateralism that work, which are sort of a long-term institutional anchoring within the ownership of regions, which is very important, but at the same time, perhaps learn from actors like Turkey that clearly have understood something which was missing in some of the other places where mediation was happening in terms of reading the room, the ripeness of conflicts, who to speak to, and the influence and financing elements that you're also mentioning, President, in terms of how do you have successful mediation processes?
Thank you. Let's get your responses, and then maybe we'll have time for another round of questions.
Thank you. Just a quick remark on the need for collaboration between state mediators and regional institutions. I think this is fundamental, because mediations or agreements fail. And to ensure their sustainability, there should be collaboration at all levels, particularly because regional institutions have enforcement capacity. State mediators may be in a position to achieve quick settlements, but they may not have the enforcement capacity that regional institutions have. So that collaboration is important. Perhaps state mediators can, in some instances, take the lead, but in collaboration with regional institutions to ensure there is a guarantee to for the agreements that will be reached. The examples that have been cited here are important examples. Mediations by Turkey, mediation by Qatar, they have all yielded good results. But we are praying that they don't break. The agreements don't break down. And to ensure that does not happen, you need to associate regional bodies. That way, there is this enforcement capacity. There is greater ownership at the regional level. So it is important. How do we create more momentum for regional organizations such as the OIC or the African Union? I think we need to build their capacity. Some of these organizations, OIC for example, does not have the capacity to undertake complex mediation, so they need to be reinforced. I work very closely with the OIC for many years, and I'm a bit aware of the capacity gap in the OIC. They may have the convening power as an organization, but then the capacity needs to be strengthened. The same thing goes for some of our for the organizations, AU and RECs. So building their capacity will perhaps enable us to create the more momentum in this area. So the question on ECOWAS's suspension of some member states and how in that context we can undertake conflict resolution. Yes, the rules indicate or provide for suspension in certain circumstances, but it does not mean all operations cease in those places, in those countries. So to be suspended sometimes may simply mean not being able to attend a meeting of statutory organs, but you remain a full member of the organization, and the communities remain seized with whatever is happening in those countries. So until the recent withdrawal of 3 of our member states, ECOWAS was active in the 3 countries in terms of encouraging dialogue, encouraging processes that have been agreed upon. So that is always there. The suspension is not like withdrawing completely from the countries. The third question is very much related to the first one, which is how do we synergize bilateral and regional processes, and this is what I have said. We really need to collaborate a lot to ensure that there is sustainability at the end of the day. Regional organizations can guarantee sustainability because they have the enforcement capacity and the enforcement authority.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this enforcement capacity is very important because in the individual country initiatives, they are very useful in terms of finding a solution, especially the countries who have will to do so. I mean, it is understandable that, you know, finding local solutions to the local conflicts makes sense because all the actors have some stakes. I mean, they are more vulnerable because of the spillover effects. They will be affected from, you know, the migration, economic problems, instability, you know, violent organizations, and, you know, overall it will be costly. So the regional actors, the priority definitely is the regional organizations, but regional countries will be more willing to engage for the dealing all these issues. But on the one hand, they will not have their own enforcement capacity. On the other hand, the other countries, as we defined, spoilers, may have interest in maintenance of the conflict. And what's going to be done under these circumstances? Oftentimes, when we look at the Middle East and African conflicts, we have the situation. So some countries benefit from the maintenance of the conflict. They rather want to keep it at certain level. So under that circumstances, it would be very difficult for the third parties to deter those actors without some kind of enforcement or without some, you know, punitive measures. Unfortunately, with milder efforts, they can spoil, but with really high investment, those peace can be restored. So that's the situation. So I really believe that this idea of finding local solutions to local conflict is very important and needs to be maintained, but at the same time, other local actors have different interests, and at the same time, finding a solution, being a successful mediator also generates some kind of political capital with this may be also interpreted as some kind of geopolitical competition. So that's the difficulty. That's why UN often considered as a more neutral body above all these interests. But for the moment, it means that we will need more local stakeholders, local conflict resolution efforts. So the other thing, I mean, NGOs, or I mean, can they play more role? I think they are even weaker because they are more dependent on in terms of their resources. They are more dependent in terms of their legitimacy as well. So I think the NGO solution, I mean, they definitely can contribute a lot in terms of mental resources, their expertise. So they have to play some role, but I think their position are even weaker under this circumstance. So I think we will continue to have this problem. So local actors have some stakes, and some actors will not want. So this will be a competition. So imperfect way.
We might also add perhaps that regional organizations may have different positions on, like the suspension of the members of ECOWAS and AU they were not necessarily on the same page on a lot of those some of those conflicts at least. So that's also another layer of complexity perhaps here. Any other questions here? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I am Ambassador Yasser Mohammed, Deputy Executive Secretary of ICGLR. Mine is just a comment rather than a question. In Africa, there is a role to be played in mediation of the African Union. For instance, we see, as indicated here by the distinguished panelists, there are a multiple of initiatives on the same issue, like what we have in DRC. There are initiatives. There is what we call it Luanda process, ICGLR-led Luanda process, and also we have EAC, East African Community, Nairobi process. Recently, there was a meeting between SADC and EAC in which they decided to merge those two peace processes related to Eastern DRC. Also, African Union earlier held a quadripartite meeting of EAC, ICGLR, SADC, and ECAS to address the issue of Eastern DRC. That is very important, and I think that it should be also applied for other problems or issues in Africa. There is a need also for the mediation process also. It was indicated that the problem of spoilers and so on. The mediation process should be, first of all, the mediators should be accepted by all parties. The mediation process should be inclusive so that everybody who a stakeholder should feel that he is included, he is not excluded. That is very important. There is a need also to make available the resources needed, because the mediation process may be protracted, may need traveling a lot and so on. It is a long process. There is a need also for capacity building. Some of those organizations, in particular in Africa, have issues of capacity gap as indicated. There is a need for training. There is a need also for technical mediation support, because generally mediation in Africa in particular is done by former president, ministers of foreign affairs, and so on. They need technical support. Sometimes that is done by diplomats from the country which is doing the mediation or chairing the organization, but there is a need of technical mediation support. In the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, we started what we call it pool of mediators. We brought from 12 member states, some experts from different ministries, and trained them, and we call them pool of mediators. This is still ongoing process. We train them on mediation, how to support mediation, and so on. So maybe those are all our efforts, but I believe that regional organizations have a role to play because they have the convening power, and as indicated, they have that enforcement power. So it is regional organizations are very important in achieving peace and stability. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's one more. Can you pass it on?
Allow me to stand because I'm at
Please.
the back. My name is Akamla Somogo. I come from IGAD. Thank you for this very important panel because it resonates with IGAD. I just heard something that the president has said for ECOWAS, and then I'm also hearing it coming from the Deputy Executive Secretary of ICGLR, which is something that we are also grappling with in IGAD. And this has to do with the multiplicity of peace processes and as has been put, is that it derails and sometimes leads to protraction of these conflicts. It would be interesting to know if there are any lessons you're learning on how we can navigate this, because two of our main conflicts now, the South Sudan at least, is not as bad now, but the Sudan is more or less going out of hand in the sense that the processes have just become so many. And sometimes trying to see which one really could lead us where we are supposed to be going is becoming a problem. So if there is some lessons that are being learned from the ECOWAS on how to navigate this challenge, I think that would be a good lesson we take back to IGAD. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one last question before we turn to our speakers for their final responses. Anybody else? No. Okay, good. Please.
Thank you. I fully agree with what the ambassador has said regarding the important role that regional and continental organizations play in finding solutions or conflict, not downplaying the important role of state mediators. I think here we have to build synergy, as the Excellency from Denmark has said. That synergy is essential. We should be able to build this to be able to gain momentum. State mediators get involved in mediation for the sake of peace. And as I've said, and as the ambassador has repeated, that peace must be sustained. And regional bodies and neighbors have a role in that. And this is why an inclusive process, even if led by a state actor, should be promoted. Consultation must be a key. Whatever we are undertaking, we should consult, we should partner with all stakeholders, including regional players. The problem of multiplicity of processes is a real problem, and as I have indicated, it is important we sell the credibility of regional players to avoid any multiplicity. I have indicated that this multiplicity did not come only in peace negotiations or in conflict resolutions, but even in addressing insecurity in our sub-region. You have, as I indicated, almost 20 initiatives, all sought to address insecurity in the region. They succeeded in one way, but failed in many ways because of fragmentation, multiplicity, lack of ownership, lack of coordination. So I think we all need to think through the multiplicity and see how we can address it. I must say it is a phenomena we have been grappling with, and just like IGAD has been grappling with, but it needs to be addressed. The solution, I don't have it, but it is a major problem that needs to be addressed for us to go forward.
Thank you very much, Esra. Your experiences are also very valuable in this. But I think what we come to the conclusion is that the landscape is changing. I mean, rather than being too pessimistic about that, I think we have to adapt, redefine the landscape, redefine how things can work under these circumstances. And the adaptation capacity of some actors are, the willing actors are higher, and some others may resist to change. But overall, I think this will turn into another landscape. It will not completely demolish, but we have to adapt conflict resolution, mediation capacity according to the changing circumstances. So this is a very important initiative. These kind of dialogues are important initiative for this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, maybe usually state mediators or regional organizations are not very much acknowledged with, sticking to the same effective mediation principles or guidelines that multilateral organizations advocate for. But from this conversation, maybe I will end with that note. Something that I'm hearing from you is that the very same principles mentioned in the UN guidance on effective mediation, like local ownership, like impartiality, like inclusivity, have been mentioned as very important principles in regional organizations' mediation efforts and state mediators to some extent. So I will end on that note, and also thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, despite the big competition we had. Thank you.